Makers series. My name is Elizabeth Daly, and I am the Executive Director for the National Foundation of Swallowing Disorders. Our goal with the Meet the Makers series is to offer our community access to those who have created products specifically for people with swallowing disorders. This series is not meant to be promotional, but rather informational. We want to give you the opportunity to ask the creators of these products and tools your questions, learn more about how they are helping people with swallowing disorders, and make connections so that your voices feel appreciated among our industry partners. We thank you for joining us this evening and hope that you find this series to be helpful. Thank you to those of you who made a donation with your registration or who have become members of our foundation. It's only with your financial support that we continue to further our mission. The makers in this series tonight are volunteering their time to share this information. They have not paid to participate in this series, nor was it required that they be past or current financial sponsors, although many of the companies that are participating, including STEP, have been prior financial sponsors of the foundation. If you have participated in one of our NFOSD webinars previously, you are likely familiar with our system. You will be muted throughout the presentation, but are encouraged to ask questions at any point during the presentation. There's about 30 minutes reserved on this call for questions, so please don't be shy about asking. We will record this presentation and make it available on our website within the next few days. No ASHA CEUs are provided, however, you will receive a certificate of participation about 24 hours following this broadcast. And with that, I want to remind you that tonight's broadcast is for informational and educational purposes. Both the NFOSD and tonight's speakers do not intend to provide any diagnostic or treatment advice or recommendations. If you need any assistance identifying a swallowing specialist, please reach out to us through email. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the creators of STEP, Dr. Ianessa Humbert and speech pathologist Rinki Virendani Desai. Dr. Ianessa Humbert is a world-renowned scientist, researcher, educator, and highly sought-after speaker with expertise in swallowing and swallowing disorders, challenging SLPs to think critically about how they assess and treat people with swallowing disorders. Dr. Humbert has been on the faculty at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, the University of Florida, and the University of Iowa. Ms. Rinki Virendani Desai is a speech-language pathologist, certified brain injury specialist, and dementia practitioner, specializing in the assessment and treatment of swallowing disorders in adults for over a decade. In addition to being the co-founder of STEP, Rinki is also the founder of the Medical SLP Forum and is recognized worldwide as an advocate for both SLPs and those impacted by dysphagia. And with that, I will turn the presentation over to Ianessa and Rinki, who have kindly volunteered their time to present to our community tonight. So let me give us just one second.
While she switches me to the presenter so I can show my slides, I just want to thank NFOSD for being willing to include us. It's great to be involved in this. And Elizabeth, just so you know, I can see this option here to show my screen, so we're good to go. And hopefully everybody can see that and we can get going. So what we're doing today is we're talking about advocacy and dysphagia management, and we're taking a patient-centered approach, which we should always do. It's imperative that we add a patient-centered approach, because sometimes as clinicians we get together, we talk about ourselves and how difficult our job is and our productivity and our salaries, but we have to remember why we're here. We are hired and trained to help other people with swallowing disorders. So Elizabeth said quite a bit, so I'll just quickly say that I'm CEO and co-founder of STEP and the Swallowing Wellness Center. I'm the creator of the first swallowing podcast called Down the Hatch, and I'm a former professor at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, University of Florida, and University of Iowa. Rinki?
Yep, and I'm the COO and co-founder of STEP, and like Elizabeth said, I've been involved in state and national associations, primarily in roles involving dysphagia advocacy and clinical support. I'm founder of the Medical SLP Forum, co-creator of the Dysphagia Therapy mobile app, and I've been an adult medical SLP with over 15 years of training and experience across the care continuum in India and the United States. So Dr. Humbert and I met maybe around 7 years ago, but 5 years ago, we came together because we had shared concerns about the state of dysphagia training and education. And we were just tired of hearing recurrent complaints from clinicians that they just weren't getting comprehensive, reliable, affordable training and education in swallowing and swallowing disorders. That's kind of what prompted us to have this shared mission and desire to come together to create stepcommunity.com, or the Swallowing Training and Education Portal, which is really an all-in-one, high-quality, low-cost, global online education platform for swallowing and swallowing disorders, which can really help anyone from basics to clinics at any stage in their dysphagia training. Our mission is to make evidence-based dysphagia education and training affordable and accessible to all. And I really hope that our vision is to live in a world where no SLP feels like the lack of training was a reason that they couldn't provide good and effective care for their patients living with dysphagia.
So STEP's evolution started out by just breaking down how a swallow works. Then we moved on to just describing clinical processes, clinical tools, et cetera. What do they do? And then in the last half of what we've been doing, we've been focusing on the clinician, how the clinician thinks, what your biases are, how prepared are you? And most recently, we've decided to launch a documentary that's really about the institution, that ties in everything, your knowledge about things as a clinician, how patients feel, how the institution influences us. And in August of 2003, this year, 2023, we had a documentary that we launched, and I'd love to share the trailer with you. Here it goes.
He got to the emergency room. I really wanted to die. I thought I was drowning, and here I couldn't swallow. It turns out I had a swallowing problem.
What percentage of your patients do you bill for therapy who you don't know, you've never seen it swallow for?
I get so bogged down by the minutia of my day, my billing time, my hour by hour by hour, that I don't think I step back and say, oh, I don't know the percentage of this and I should be better.
Talking and learning a little bit about the patient. And listening to them. NPO should be the last, to me, it should be the very, 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 very last resort. Your quality of life is flushed out the toilet.
I think we don't ask because our students are not taught to ask. If you pull out any clinical bedside swallow eval, asking the patient is not on top.
You have a patient every day and you have been a patient. Why aren't you making the connection between what you want as a human and what you would want for other people?
I think that's why, and I've said this all the time when I taught classes to clinicians, I said, you have the hardest job. They come to you as an expert to say, yes or no.
Yeah.
And it takes a really brave clinician to say, I can't tell you.
And there's the consequences for speaking up and saying something. And those can be very real. Those can be very harsh from critics that you work with.
It's almost like people don't understand that you are a human being who's making a decision to side with whatever institution that's holding you captive because they're part of your identity or they give you a salary.
Especially in the healthcare world, right? I think, I don't know, the ethical commitment is lost somewhere because, and then people, instead of like trying to fix it, start blaming the institution that they're a part of.
Yes.
The right side paralysis from the stroke is not like that. Where the swallowing, which is kind of an invisible one.
If you don't know the right doctors, you can, not saying mistreated, you can get suboptimal.
You can get mistreated, there's no question about it. If you had a stroke and you had a problem with your swallow, and a speech pathologist came to your bedside and said, we're recommending you never eat by mouth again, you get a tube in your stomach, would you just eat anyway?
My answer would be this. Let me put it in your stomach first, so it works. Don't experiment with me.
There you go, that's the answer. So the purpose of that documentary is to really show the human side of what we're supposed to be working on, not just the humans who are the patients who struggle with dysphagia, but the humans who are the clinicians who also struggle with dysphagia and the healthcare system. So hopefully that'll be something that you guys take some interest in. You can find it at stepcommunity.com and just click documentary in the menu. So who is affected by swallowing disorders, also known as dysphagia? 1 in 25 adults in the United States annually, 50% of Americans over 60, 50 to 75% of nursing home residents, 50 to 60% of head and neck cancer survivors, 40 to 78% of stroke survivors, and 80% or more of patients with Parkinson's disease. So quite a number, and a lot of the strange things about all of this is that people don't really know about swallowing disorders until they have it. And so we have a lot of work on our slate, because not only do we have to help people with the problem, we have to educate them on the fact that this problem exists, which is quite different from people who can't walk or speak anymore. They've heard of those things. And of course, the consequences hit them quite hard. In particular, there are issues with malnutrition, dehydration, death, illness, disability/frailty. There's also all the hospitalizations, which I think we don't really consider as much. Just being in the hospital, dealing with the hospital, it's difficult. Being readmitted to hospitals, the breathing problems that they have that can be so scary, depression because of quality of life issues, and just being isolated socially. So SLPs will be competent, and confident is a concept that we all have, right? So there's this idea that if you are a speech pathologist and you've been trained, you're fine and you kind of know what to do. But unfortunately, many studies show that after graduate training, it's not the case that speech pathologists are competent and confident in dysphagia management. The current state of swallowing training and education shows that there is inadequate clinical perceptions of competence and knowledge base. There's insufficient education and training, low level of agreement among speech pathologists while looking at the same patient, poor accuracy for classification of normal versus disordered swallowing, as well as significant knowledge gaps and barriers. So these are the kinds of things that if you heard in another field like cardiology, that two physicians are looking at the same EKG and have wildly different opinions about it. One is saying this is terribly normal and someone's saying this is drastically terrible. You'd wonder a lot about the field, wouldn't you? So across the studies, across the globe, and more beyond what you see here, there have been more in the last 10 years or so. The underlying summary, I would say, is that additional education and training in normal and disordered swallowing are critically needed to improve dysphagia diagnostic accuracy and to earn our titles as dysphagia treatment specialists. So what does the ASHA Speech Language Pathology Healthcare Survey report? If you're not involved with our field, ASHA stands for American Speech Language Hearing Association. So they have something called caseload characteristics. And this is important because some people don't realize how many people are actually managing swallowing. So 87% of SLPs are providing primary swallowing services in their facilities. Most adult clinical services are spent on swallowing, and that's at least 41%. It's probably gone up quite a bit. 35% of speech pathologists in schools are managing dysphagia in some way, shape, or form. SLPs in medical hospitals spend more than half of their adult clinical services time on swallowing, and then dysphagia is now the largest recognized subspecialty in the field of speech-language pathology. So what are the consequences in terms of their patient stories? And some of these were shared with us from NFOSD, so thank you so much for that. A man who was 6 months post-brainstem stroke was told by his physician that he would never be able to eat again. He attempted to connect with several SLPs in his state and eventually traveled out of state and is now back on an oral diet. So this is sharing the issue associated with finding a specialist where you live. In your state, he couldn't find a specialist who could help him. A wife of an older gentleman with dementia in a nursing home with multiple failed attempts to allow her husband to have water, unthickened water, which is water, reached out, and the wife had excellent understanding of the risks, but the staff refused to allow her to bring and give him water. The nursing home was even using thickened water to brush his teeth. Now, what's really interesting here is that the patient and the patient's caregiver know what's best for the patient and the caregiver as far as they see it, but the nursing home has taken a very patriarchal view of their bodies, of these people's bodies, and has made decisions for them on their behalf. Decisions, mind you, that they might not make for themselves, because many polls show that clinicians who are involved in a particular type of practice would not accept the same treatment if they were their own patient. And that includes physicians involved in very invasive treatments, as well as speech pathologists who would say, I would never have a PEG tube or be on thickened liquids myself, even though I recommend it so frequently. Another is so many patients being told it's in their head and being dismissed. That's huge, because swallowing is already a hidden complex problem. And so to be told that what they're feeling in their body is not real probably really helps them along the depression line that we've been talking about. And we don't always think that we're causing those kinds of concerns for patients, but we are. A man with dysphagia due to C-spine, so cervical spine trauma, after being hit by a car as a pedestrian, has dysphagia, and it's his only ongoing serious complication. After months of dysphagia treatment with no opportunity to swallow anything, he sought another opinion and now is eating some foods orally. He kept saying early on, how am I supposed to get better at swallowing if they won't let me swallow anything because they're scared? I think that one speaks for itself. So advocacy, there's patient advocacy and clinician advocacy. When we talk about patient advocacy, it's important to know that most patients are unaware of swallowing disorders, most people, period, and how to identify and manage it. In fact, most of us could say before we became speech pathologists, we didn't know much about it either. So if patients do not know what care they are entitled to, they will not know what to ask, request, or demand. Okay, so it's our job to say, this is the standard of care that you are owed, so that they can demand it themselves. So are we educating our patients about what care they should have received, or are we just justifying the care that they did receive? What I mean is, maybe a patient should have had imaging to confirm that they even have a swallowing problem, but we don't have imaging at our facility, so we don't even tell them about the imaging. But we justify the fact that a clinical swallowing evaluation where there is no imaging was sufficient to identify a hidden problem. That's an example. Why does that matter? Because you have to acknowledge your conflict of interest. This is where clinician advocacy matters. For many speech pathologists, giving the highest standard of care means directly opposing their employer and thus their salaries. Remember that. If you want to advocate for the best care that that patient can have, it might mean putting you in a position where you are saying ethically, this is what's best for them, but my facility won't give that, and they're going to come to me and say, you're making life hard and expensive for this institution. So what do you choose? Your reputation and your collegial network and your salary, or do you choose the patient and what you know you would want if you were not with the institution, rather a patient at the institution? So for many SLPs, giving the highest standard of care means directly opposing their egos and this concept of I know what's best for you. Yeah, the other thing you have to think about is if somebody had to look you in your eye and give you cash for services that you render to them, would you do the same thing you're doing now? Would you actually say, this is a human being paying me money to help them with their body? We are so distant from the the financial transactions associated with our salaries, that we focus on things like productivity, because that's for our salaries, right? But what about the productivity for the patient in terms of giving the best quality of care as opposed to the best quantity of care? So here's a way that we are suggesting that you can get free access to educating your patients. So you can use these resources and they can as well. I have a website called ianessahumbert.com. It's my first name, last name.com. If you click on patients, it'll take you to this page. I created some very easy to understand patient tutorials. These can also be found on the NFOSD website. And each of these represents a different video you can watch. I would focus a lot on clinical swallowing evaluation, modified barium swallow studies, and fiber optic endoscopic evaluation of swallowing, because these are often the things that are confused. People say, I had a swallow test, and they don't know which one they had or should have had or what could have been available to them. So be bold, arm your patient with knowledge so they can demand better care. So empowering patients and caregivers, we have quite a list here, and much of this is in the handout, so I'm not going to read it all to you, but we put this list together because it's important to understand that empowering patients and caregivers really means that you have to do a lot of the work to tell them what they are owed, whether that puts you in a bad position or not. And of course, you will see this list in your handouts as well, just a nice way to look at empowering and advocacy for SLPs, right? So a lot of it has to do with making sure that you're educated. So STEP is one resource, but there are so many other resources to make sure you at least understand how a swallow works, what a clinician should and should not do, etc. But you might know all those things and still butt up against your institution in terms of their willingness to grant your patient access to what is needed. So empowering and advocacy for SLPs is a little bit more complex. I'm going to take a break right here because we have a couple of poll questions for you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and allow for Elizabeth to show hers so she can help us with the poll. We have some questions here. So here it is. Do you think SLPs face a conflict of interest, that's what COI stands for, when balancing their roles between institutions that they work for versus their responsibilities as patient advocates? And so you can click yes or no. We're collecting responses right now. Hopefully you guys can see that on your right as you go. More than 70% of people are saying yes.
So I'll close up and share that.
Okay. Yeah, so about 70% of people say yes, that there is a conflict of interest between those two. I think we have one more poll question and then we'll, yeah, okay. So do you think specialized residencies and training opportunities, so I just want to be clear here, what we're talking about is as physicians, they get their general degree and then they go to a residency to specialize. So do you think specialized residencies and training opportunities would enhance SLP competency and dysphagia to improve outcomes? 100% yes so far. Yeah, I have a feeling this is going to be a popular one, that if there was specialized formal training beyond just the maybe 9-month clinical fellowship, that people might agree with that. Yeah, not a big surprise there. Did we have another question? Yep, one more. Okay.
Yep, one more.
Okay, which of the following do you think is the most important aspect of patient advocacy and dysphagia management? Select one of the following: raising dysphagia awareness and education, improving patient access to specialized care, enhancing communication between speech pathologists and patients, or improving education and training opportunities for speech pathologists.
I'll give people just a few more seconds here to vote and then I'll share the results with you. All right, I'll share them here.
Wow, so 67% say improving education and training opportunities for speech pathologists. Very good, very good. All of these are very important. Okay. All right, so Rinky is now going to finish the last part of our presentation before we open the floor up to get comments and questions from each of you.
Elizabeth, can you give me screen sharing?
Yes, you the presenter here. You should see it pop up any second that says, make me the presenter.
Mm-hmm. And hope, okay. So yeah, as Yanessa said, we really need to be advocates for our patients, and we really need to make sure that we are empowering our patients and empowering our caregivers. Just a second. So one way to do that is to make sure that we are explaining the reasoning and rationales behind our assessment and treatment recommendations and the importance of following through with those recommendations. I can't tell you the number of people someone has come to me not knowing why they had a FEES versus an MBS, why only a clinical swallow assessment was done, and why certain treatment recommendations were handed to them. Even if it's as something as sitting up straight, tucking your chin, moving your head from one side to another. We have to explain the physiology and the meaning behind it to really make sure we are getting their buy-in, especially if we're modifying someone's diet. We have to explain why that's being done and not just expect them to follow through because you're the healthcare provider and they're just expected to listen to everything you have to say. Another thing we need to encourage is to make sure that we are encouraging them to ask questions. Again, a lot of this could be cultural, where patients have gone through so much already. They're so disgruntled with the healthcare system that has possibly failed them repeatedly. If you just go onto the Facebook group of the NFOSD and look at some of the complaints that patients have and how they've been mistreated, it's really heartbreaking to see how many SLPs have failed them. So they might just be walking into your clinic and coming to you already expecting you to fail them. And that's not on them. I think the onus is on us to make sure that we are fostering that trust and open lines of communication. We're encouraging them, if they need to seek second opinions, if they need to think about whether they want therapy or they really want to invest their time and money and resources with us. And we also need to encourage them to build a strong network of support. So the NFOSD is a great patient advocacy association. They have online support groups. We need to also make sure we're supporting the caregivers with resources to connect possibly with other caregivers in the community. And obviously, a lot of our patients have underlying diagnoses like possibly dementia, Parkinson's, or stroke, and whatever that is. I feel like, again, the onus is on us as clinicians to not just treat the swallowing problem in isolation, but kind of think about the bigger picture and how those diagnoses could really be that additional layer that might be preventing them from being successful in therapy. We need to make sure we're providing realistic and clear expectations. I think this is especially true for younger clinicians, where all of us have been in this fix-it mentality and our bubbly personalities, and we go in and we just want to fix everything. But I don't think that's fair for the patients to give them unrealistic hope sometimes, especially if they're head and neck cancer survivors, have neurodegenerative diseases, or just other factors like lack of resources or reasons we know that they're probably not going to be as successful in therapy or not going to have a great prognosis, to then say, well, I'm going to take you from feeding tube to eating in 2 weeks, because that's just not going to happen. Alternately, I think it's also important that we do give our patients hope sometimes, because like I said, sometimes you're the only person who can do that for them. And they've repeatedly just experienced failure and setbacks, and really do everything you can to optimize and facilitate their success and buy-in in therapy. I'll say this especially for our elderly patients, because I think a lot of the times, especially in nursing homes, these patients are quite forgotten. And I think the traditional viewpoint tends to be that, oh, they're not just going to be active participants in rehab, or exercise isn't for this person, or let's just put them on feeding tubes and let's just put them on modified diets and see what happens. So again, really the onus is on us to make sure we are giving every single patient an opportunity to get better and to eat and swallow safely and enjoyably. It's really important for us to make sure we're supporting patient-centered goals, person-centered decision-making, and also providing care that's ethical, culturally sensitive, holistic, and interprofessional. Again, a lot of us tend to work in isolation, and I think sometimes my students have told me this, they feel intimidated by physicians. But I think if we really know what we're doing, we know our anatomy and physiology, and we speak the same language that other healthcare providers do, we have to take that extra step and reach out to the referring physician or the GI or the pulmonologist or the neurologist and tell them what we know about swallowing and make our recommendations and ask questions and really work together as a team to make sure, again, that at the center of all of this, it's our patient who has the positive outcomes. We also need to empower ourselves. If we want to see changes in the profession, if we want better training opportunities, we want better reimbursement, we have to be the change we wish to see. One way of doing that is staying informed and being aware of relevant healthcare legislation and policies that not just affect our patients, but also affect the care that we can provide. It's also important that we share our knowledge with our colleagues. We offer guidance to our patients and caregivers on how they can better navigate healthcare systems and the ever-evolving reimbursement challenges. We need to make sure we're educating our patients, again, like I said, about their rights in healthcare and shared decision-making. We also need to build trust with our patients and interprofessional teams. and really showcase our worth and value and expertise. I think I can't tell you, I think every place I've ever worked in, most people don't know how much we know about swallowing. Most people don't know how much we can treat in terms of cognition, communication, voice and swallowing and fluency, and just the scope and depth and breadth of what we can do as SLPs. And there's a reason that we don't get reimbursed for our services, because I don't think we've done a good job at making other people aware of truly the value that we bring to the table. So make sure you're communicating all of that effectively across the continuum of care, making sure our documentation is effective, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Make sure you're using resources and support networks that already exist in your community with your state and national associations. And if you want to get fees or MBS in your facility, you want to get tools and devices for your patients, you don't have to write up these proposals from scratch. Use the Medical SLP Forum on Facebook, connect with any one of us on Instagram, and work with SLPs in your community. Again, like I said, to not reinvent the wheel and to do what you can to support these advocacy efforts. I think, like we saw in the poll and like all of us said, the biggest way to empower ourselves and to help our patients is to improve our knowledge and skills. We can blame the administration, the institution, we can blame ASHA, but I think we have to reflect and see within whether we are to blame for poor patient care. And we have to keep up with education, evidence, and best practices in our field. I highlighted this to say that we have to engage in reliable and relevant lifelong learning to best serve our patients' needs. And I say this because you'll see so many questions about what's the best dysphagia CEU I can take? What's the best certification I can take that can make me more marketable? Best for whom? If you're working in a head and neck cancer facility, but you're trying to get certified in Lee Silverman voice treatment for Parkinson's disease, or you're trying to get MBS IMP training, but you're not going to be doing outpatient swallow studies for 5 years, or you're trying to get vital stim certified, but you don't even have a device to work with, you're not helping your patient. So really seek out continuing education opportunities that will not serve ourselves, but really serve the patient that we're here to treat. One way to do that, to step up your dysphagia knowledge and skills, is by using the resources and courses that we've put together on STEP Community. We think of STEP as the Netflix for swallowing. At a very affordable cost, you can log in anytime, learn at your own pace, anytime from any place. We offer monthly membership plans that just start at $15 a month. So again, we've made it a point to make it really affordable. And we offer over 75 hours of courses, all created by Dr. Humbert, with an extensive focus on normal swallowing, assessment, treatment, ethics, DEI, and professional issues. One of the, I think, unique features that separates STEP from other CEU courses is the in-depth review of structures that Dr. Humbert has created in the form of swallowing neuroanatomy and physiology shorts called SNAPs. These are tutorials that extensively focus on normal swallowing anatomy and physiology, because if we don't understand normal, we won't know what's abnormal and how to treat it. We also offer advanced swallow physiology masterclass classes and something called VIP training, which is video fluoroscopic interpretation of physiology, where really the focus is not just on watching a bunch of swallow studies, which a lot of clinicians don't get to do before they even start practice, but really identifying whether something is normal or abnormal, why that's the case, what the underlying swallowing impairments are, and how we can use that and follow an evidence-based way to apply that information to treat our patients. Dr. Humbert mentioned the documentary. So we have a lot of resources for patient awareness and advocacy. We offer STEP in multiple languages, fostering a global community. We have educational events like a swallowing symposium and Insta CEUs that again align with our mission of affordable education and training. And we also partner with over 100 universities and offer university licenses that support undergraduate and graduate student training. So I truly believe that STEP is a testament of the power of researcher-clinician partnerships in our field and what this shared mission of advocacy can truly achieve. In the last 5 years, we've had over 30,000 enrollments, over 100 university collaborations, global reach and advocacy, a lot of positive feedback and community. We've demonstrated an improvement in clinician knowledge and skills, all of which have created abundance of opportunities to improve our patient outcomes. I think all of us as SLPs have this true privilege of being able to restore such a fundamental aspect of human existence, helping someone eat and swallow safely and enjoyably. And I don't think we should be in positions where we're abusing that power and privilege. Again, I think the onus is on all of us to be better patient advocates and to do what we can to work together to improve the lives of the patients we serve. Thank you to everyone for attending our talk today. We're going to open it up to questions. We've also created a promo code where you can get 20% off any of our annual membership plans. All the information is here and will be in your handouts. And we'd love to connect with you. We have our information there. And again, thank you to the NFOSD for giving us this opportunity. And I really hope that we can all be better patient advocates by engaging in more conversations like this.
Thank you, Nina. So thank you so much for that presentation. We have some questions that have come in, so I'll get started with those if that's okay. Both of the questions that I'm seeing are from our patient and caregiver community, so I'll start there. The first one here talks about, it's a caregiver whose daughter is 10 years old, and she's been working with both OTs, so occupational therapists, and SLPs to help with her dysphagia. And she's wondering if there's a collaboration and what the relationship is between these two professional communities and what their training looks like. And are they more likely to find dysphagia specialists within the SLP community versus the OT community? And can you speak a little more to that?
Yeah, so I can tell you that occupational therapists and speech pathologists both do receive training regarding swallowing and feeding. Their approach might be different, and you'll probably find more occupational therapists dealing with the younger population than the older population. And to answer your question, in general, that depends. It depends on the institution. It depends on the professional collaboration that individuals make. There isn't sort of an inherent connection between like a gynecologist and an obstetrician where they like from one to the other, and they might do one or both things, right? Very clearly. It's not sort of that well infused. So the best advice I can give you is that identify in your facility with where your daughter is, how well they interact. I encourage you to speak directly to the clinicians that you're dealing with, remind them how important and precious your daughter is, which they'll say, of course she is, and then say, how well do you guys collaborate? Ask the people who are in front of you, because it varies so widely. There are institutions where there are fights, right, in terms of territorial wars. I hope that's not what you're seeing, but if it is, it's your job, unfortunately, to say, hey, I need you guys to get along. She matters. So I encourage you to do that.
Excellent, thank you for that response. I'm going to use this time too to plug in our next webinar that's coming up at the end of the month that is on pediatric feeding disorders. So if you're interested in that topic, there will be more information on the 24th, and we'll send out a link to that webinar after this. I have another question here for the two of you. From somebody who is a survivor of head and neck cancer. They've been seeing an SLP, and they mentioned that their SLP has not given them any direction on how to improve their swallowing. How do they address that without offending? They mentioned that they've been given a device, and they've also done some independent research and purchased another device for dysphagia treatment, but they haven't been given any guidance on how to use these.
Okay, Rinky, do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
Yeah, that's unfortunate, and we obviously need a little bit more information, because I'd like to know, did you end up working with this SLP and actually have a formal swallow assessment? Was the plan to initiate therapy, and what was the conversation you had? If they attempted therapy and then kind of have just left you in the lurch and you're just having to deal with things on your own, I definitely think, like Inessa said, even for the previous question, you need to go back and have a conversation very directly with them. I think it's very common for patients to think they're offending us. I think that's something that needs to change. You're the one who's paying for this service, and you're investing your time and energy and resources to get better. And really, that SLP owes it to you to give you the treatment that you deserve. So I think just going back and having a conversation and saying, this isn't working for me. I'm not sure what we're working on. What are my goals? What am I expected to do in therapy? Is there a home exercise program I need to be working on? talking about the devices with them and really opening up the channel of communication is something you absolutely should be doing, and we encourage you to do that because that SLP owes you the best treatment they can provide.
Agreed. Bottom line, well said.
Thank you. I have a question here for you from an SLP. What are your thoughts on SLPs being paid for their services by the number of goals or the percentage of a goal that they meet for a patient rather than just by billing dysphagia treatment code, for example?
Yeah, I hear your question. And what I would say is, first tell me how you can confirm that that goal was even met.
Yeah.
Because we all know that these goals are arbitrary and that people progress because if they don't, we won't get paid, right? So there's that factor. We can't differentiate people who are actually getting better from those who are progressing because a speech pathologist is, and I'm talking about swallowing, I'm not talking about voice, language, anything else. When you're talking about a hidden, complex problem that both the patient can't see and you can't see, and your goal is they're going to swallow and aspirate less, and that's your goal. And you know that you need imaging for aspiration, and you're counting aspirations based on coughs, which the cough could have meant anything, could have meant a good response or a bad response. I don't know what the cough means, right? So if that's the case, whether it's goals or based on billing code is one question to ask, but I would ask myself, whether you get your productivity based on one or the other, how do you know if somebody's reaching a goal? Are you setting goals that you know you can't identify? Whether you're getting billed based on that or not, for ethical reasons. For ethical reasons, you should know the answer to that question. The second question is, okay, now how do the finances lay out? First question is, are you creating goals that you know you can't identify to clearly track and that nobody else can? That's the question to ask.
Yeah.
Thank you. A comment and a question here from a community member mentioning that this was an eye-opening presentation, that they didn't recognize that not all SLPs were dysphagia specialists and had this sort of training. How do you know if you're going to see somebody that they are knowledgeable and competent to treat you?
What an amazing question. I think what Rinky and I should do is create some kind of questionnaire sorts that people should be able to identify. The truth is, we actually published a study that was funded by by ASH Foundation, American Speech Language Hearing Foundation, to identify speech pathologists and their competency. And we found that even people who had all the training, they had the modified bearing swallow study training, they had their board specialized. Rinky, remind me how.
Specialists in swallowing.
That's right. So the board specialists in swallowing, they too had significant difficulty identifying what a normal swallow is from an abnormal swallow. And it's not because it's just so complicated. It's because the training hasn't been there. Okay. So the best way to understand is to have them ask them questions about their philosophy, and then feel very free to share that on NFOSD, share it with STEP, share it with a community where you can say, hi, I'm a patient, I asked these questions, this clinician said that this is what their typical practice is. So we can help vet the community for you. We're not here to bash anybody, we're not here to praise anybody, we're here to ensure that the people who are paying for their bodies to get healthier actually get what they're paying for, provided it's possible. We're here to make sure you get the best care possible. And if that means raising the bar for speech pathologists by helping to vet their responses, we're happy to communicate as a community to do that together.
Yeah. Thanks. I'm not sure if you'll know the answer to this question, but do you see that same phenomenon across other disciplines where they're expected to know something, but the specialists can't even tell you what's normal versus abnormal?
Rinky, I have a thought, but I'll let you go first.
Personally, in my experience, I've never seen that with a physician. I will say that because I think they get extensive training. Obviously, there are bad physicians, just like there's bad professions in every profession, but I feel like they've gone through the residency, they've done the fellowship, and I think their institutions and the associations they're a part of hold them to a certain standard. Like Dr. Humbert said, they've already raised the bar to where they have to meet a certain standard before they can practice. in OT and PT, in occupational physical therapy, again, I do feel that they tend to be a lot more specialized than us as speech pathologists because they have lesser things that they're dealing with. I just think the scope of SLP practice is so broad and we're expected to do so much. And so many generations of clinicians have kind of gone by doing the bare minimum and still showing themselves as experts, and nobody has held them accountable, that it's become a problem.
Yeah, so you said a lot of what I was going to say. I will add that the only time I've ever seen this in another clinical specialty is when it is so rare that people just are like, we've never seen this before. When it's like an episode of some, Grey's Anatomy, that's when it's like, whoa, what's that, right? But to Rinky's point, we're dealing with the profession, if you don't mind me giving you a very brief history here, which is swallowing disorders have been around as long as people been around. As long as Homo sapiens have been here, there's been swallowing problems. As long as there's been a stroke or something like that, there have been swallowing problems. But healthcare is very behind. Speech pathologists only got swallowing in their scope of practice to bill for it in the 90s. So we are so behind every other professional. And we were already allowed to bill for it and treat it in hospitals before it was ever required in school systems, meaning in graduate schools. And to this day, you can still go to a graduate school who just doesn't have a swallowing expert on faculty, and they don't have to have a full dysphagia class, even though we know the vast majority of people who graduate from that program will likely end up treating someone with dysphagia, but they'll get the same degree as anybody else who had specialized training. So we have an imbalance between the people who can train, the me's of the world. There aren't that many swallowing specialists who can train at my level on the planet, but we have a plethora of people graduating and a much larger number of people with swallowing disorders. So everything is all over the place. So we need louder voices among the people like ourselves who can say something to really say this is a problem. So that's why we're seeing it going on right now. It's just we have that huge imbalance between education about the problem and access to patients to help them with the problem.
You mentioned that universities can offer graduate programs and not have a dysphagia course, and you mentioned that STEP has partnered with universities. What does that partnership look like?
Yeah, we provide university licenses, which essentially just means that every semester the instructor can utilize STEP courses and resources, and they infuse that in their curriculum in different ways. Some of them just supplement it with what they're already doing. I would say majority of them just replace the textbook completely with STEP coursework and have students go through the normal swallowing assessment treatment in a fashion that would mimic a traditional graduate curriculum. We also have instructors who are just using the anatomy and physiology portion at the undergraduate level. So essentially, they're just using our courses to teach the curriculum in their classes.
I also want to add that I was on faculty at University of Iowa, and for as long as I had ever known, University of Iowa was always the top program. When they recruited me, there was no dysphagia course. There was no dedicated dysphagia course, and they were the #1 speech pathology program. So it's not necessarily the case that the top programs are going to have it and the programs that aren't at the top won't have it. It has to do with which faculty are hired. And if there aren't enough faculty to go around with the specialty, then it's not going to happen.
Thanks. We have a comment here from an SLP who felt that their one semester of dysphagia training wasn't enough, and commenting that they could have had a whole semester just studying normal swallowing and then a whole nother semester dedicated for dysphagia impaired swallowing.
Yeah, so that's why we made STEP the way it is. I have said this in, my rants around the world forever, which is every other subspecialty in speech pathology, be it voice, swallowing, etc., they all have an undergrad, not swallowing, voice, speech, language, etc. They all, in undergrad, you learn what's normal. And then in grad school, you learn what's abnormal. But for swallowing, in grad programs, you have to learn abnormal and normal at the same time. If there's anything in our profession where you don't know what normal is, it's swallowing, because nobody in that room has ever seen their swallow before or a swallow. But we know what normal speech sounds like. We know what normal language should be because we've been raised in a world where we've been hearing it. If you're at a grocery store and somebody's speech sounds like maybe they had a stroke, you can perk up to it whether you're a specialist or not. But with swallowing, you need that foundational principle. But again, it has to do with the fact that there aren't enough specialists like myself to train at all those levels. So in my classroom, I was not the most popular professor because I was very difficult, because I was like, look, I'm sorry, you guys have to learn everything in one semester. I have to take you through all of undergrad and all through grad school in one semester. And I'm thinking right now, would I let you treat my father if he had dysphagia? And right now, the answer is no. So now that's the level of concern that we need to have, and that's the level of rigor we need to have. Grad students don't love it at the moment. They're worried about getting an A, but then when they graduate and they're competent and they're confident, then they appreciate it.
And I'll just add, that's again the reason STEP exists. Like, all of this isn't bad and saying like, okay, we know the problems, you're not graduating with enough training, but that's not stopping you. That shouldn't be an excuse or a reason to say, well, my school didn't train me, so I'm just going to not be the best therapist, or I'm not going to help my patients. We just have to go that extra mile and use resources like STEP. And Swallowing Wellness is coming up with in-person trainings, and we're going to have a lot of opportunities for clinicians to kind of go that extra mile. Unfortunately, it will be self-directed and self-motivated. Unfortunately, you may not be in a position where your institution might support you financially, but I think the more of us that create affordable training opportunities and resources and things that are reliable, where there are experts like Dr. Humbert creating this coursework that you can trust and implement in your daily practice, we're just going to advance the profession and make the field better for our patients. So there are solutions. We just need to talk more about it and explore them.
And we need to create a culture of competency.
Yeah.
There's no culture of competency. Rather, everyone's not raising their hand and saying, I don't know. And they're just blindly treating, but nobody in that group of speech pathologists at that particular hospital will point out, we're not doing a good job here. Then we're going to have a culture of basically complacency, right? One where we say, well, I don't know, but she doesn't know either, so I can't be that bad if nobody pipes up here. It's time to pipe up. People are on the line.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question for you. Because you had mentioned that the scope of what SLPs can offer is so broad, would you recommend, or what are your thoughts on SLPs specializing in one specific area like speech or voice or swallow cognition versus having an adequate knowledge of all of that? What do you think would be the best makeup for, if you're launching a department of SLPs, how would you want to structure that in terms of their training? Obviously, we really want everybody to be experts at everything, but in the real world.
I would take it out of grad school. Just take it out of grad school. Grad school is a generalist degree. Stop expecting, like when you're in medical school, they're not like, okay, go deliver babies. Because they know the whole human body and how many ever years med school is. It's not enough. They expect additional training. So I wouldn't put it on the grad schools. They have a lot to get you to be a generalist. That's their job. It's not their fault that there aren't residencies. I say, let the private sector do those kinds of things, because the private sector is better at doing that. The private sector has all of the bells and whistles you need to train. They have C-arms, they have fees, they have devices, they have the patients. The grad schools don't have the patients, right? Yeah. So it's really not up to the grad schools to figure everything out any more than it is that the medical college can show you every possible patient. They partner with hospitals and nursing homes, et cetera, mostly hospitals, obviously, so you can understand what's going on. So it's really a matter of partnerships and industry understanding what can happen, not just financially, how this benefits them when they don't have as many bounce back with patients with dehydration, malnutrition, and pneumonia, but also what it means to train a new generation of people who are more competent and can practice at the top of their license and not be worried about productivity, but rather the quality of care for patients, so they're actually better. So I say it's not just grad school. Grad school needs to listen to the data and say, we have leverage to be able to forge a real relationship with these other groups, just like nursing schools do and medical schools do, et cetera.
I'll just add that as an SLP, it's also really important, because I've had students ask me this sometimes. If you don't know what you're doing, don't just feel like you have to treat someone because your school told you so. Even within dysphagia, within my outpatient department, I was the ALS clinic specialist and we had the head neck cancer specialist. She never tried to treat my ALS patients because she just didn't have experience with that population, and vice versa. And again, if you want to specialize in voice or swallowing or AAC or whatever it is, I think it's completely okay to say, you know, I'm not going to be the best person for a patient with aphasia or a language disorder because I just haven't seen someone with that in 10 years. And you'd rather refer that patient out to someone else in the community who's a specialist. So I think these specialty areas exist. We just don't have to feel like we have to treat everything. In fact, we shouldn't be treating everything and do what's best for the patient.
Thank you. A couple more questions here that have come in. There's one about insurance and advocacy and how SLPs should learn about insurance, where billing sometimes feels like this magical practice where you click a button in the medical chart and boom, it goes through. How can SLPs become more knowledgeable about Medicare rules, for example?
Go learn it. You know why I say that? You know, because if it was you and something in your life where your money was going down the drain for something, you'd learn it. If it was a claim for insurance for some service that you got that you didn't think was fair, you'd figure out the claim process. Asking how to learn it, you work in an institute where you're billing, ask them how it happens. You have more access than anybody else because you hit the send button and it magically goes somewhere. Well, ask where it goes next. Go to the billing department and ask them, hey, how does this work? And then they say, oh, this office is this is that. And you say, I'm an employee, I have questions, I just want to know. They're not going to kick you out and say you can't know this. And if they do, then you know something that they don't want you to know. It's online, it's everywhere. If you really want to know it, it's there to learn. So treat the patients you're interacting with as if it was your body or your family's body where you felt like insurance was somehow not clear, or you weren't sure if you had a deductible and all those things. You figured that out because it's your wallet. So figure it out because it's your integrity. That would be my response to that.
And ASHA has a lot of resources. Your state association might as well, but ASHA has a whole section on billing, reimbursement, and learning about the claims process, learning about denials, what skilled services look like, and it's all free. So I think start with the ASHA resources that exist, and then, like Inessa said, like every institution is different. The payers you're going to deal with are different. So I think, yeah, just kind of learn what's happening in your facility and take the effort to also educate others, because you want to make sure everyone who's treating the patient is aware of this information.
Thank you. I don't know if one of you is able to put the slide back up about the discount or the promo code that you're offering and the links to STEP, but if you have that slide, if you could put that back up. And in the meantime, there's a question from somebody who was a prior STEP member wondering if they need to rejoin. How do you sign up versus or annually versus monthly? Is there an option for that?
Yeah, you just go to stepcommunity.com and go to memberships. There's a memberships tab. We have 3 plans depending on whether you want CEUs or not. There's a starter plan, a plus plan, and a CEU plan. Everything is clearly laid out. And for each plan, you can either pay month by month or you can sign up for an annual membership. So the giveaway we're doing is 20% off any annual membership plan. You would click on it, and at checkout, you would enter the promo code NFOSD. And this is only valid until October 15th. But I'm also going to make sure Elizabeth has all of this information in the handouts that she'll be emailing to all the attendees.
Excellent, thank you. We do have one more question, and it's a question that the foundation receives all the time. This one is coming from an SLP, but we also receive it from community members. What do you do, what do you recommend when insurance denies covering an instrumental swallow assessment that both the SLP and the patient feel are necessary? What's the next step?
Good question. As a human being who has to make a decision about your own body, it really does come down to whether or not you're willing to pay out of pocket for it. Because a lot of times this imaging is essential for you to understand your health going forward. So for instance, there are all kinds of screeners. I had a mammogram and they said, hey, you know, if you want this extra AI version of thing where we can see things more, it's $60. And I had a decision, and they said it's not covered by insurance. I had to decide, did I want to make sure that based on my family history, is it worth my financial situation to add that amount? That might be the next step. But in addition to that, the other thing is a group effort for advocating in terms of changing that, right? Oftentimes it's about people not understanding what imaging does. So step one is you decide for your body, is this, how much ever it's going to be, worth it for me to get the answers I need for in the short term for my personal health. But long term, it's also about communicating with the payers and saying, also from at the hospital level, we need to really influence these guys to understand that when they don't pay for this, they don't pay for imaging, they pay for the pneumonias, they pay for the dehydration, they pay for the rehospitalizations. That's what's on the line, and that's preventative.
I'll just add 2 more points because I've had this experience where patients have not been able to pay out of pocket as well. There are just a lot of financial limitations where I was able to work with the financial department in the hospital, and they have something called financial assistance packages that they only provide for physician services. Now, when you get an imaging study, there's a radiologist involved who's a physician, and there's an SLP. So out of the $500 that the patient had to self-pay, they could offset $350, which was the radiologist fee. So it kind of reduced what the patient had to pay. So sometimes we have to advocate for the patient to find out solutions. And the other thing I'll add is what Dr. Humbert said as well. Again, at our hospital, for patients with stroke and head and neck cancer, the financial assistance packages were being provided for years, probably decades, only for PT and OT. Physical and occupational therapy. And when I started there, I was like, why is speech therapy not covered for something like a stroke or head and neck cancer? And they just said that's just how it's always been done. And it was a huge advocacy effort and a lot of extra work that none of us had to do as speech pathologists, but we took the time and effort to do it because we wanted to make sure these patients are also getting financial assistance for speech therapy services. So again, I just would encourage all of you to take the time to find out the problem and not just say, oh, it's been a problem for so long, too bad, pay out of pocket. Do what you can to change those circumstances for your patients.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rinki, for that. And I think it's so important for the SLPs to help the patient because they're already facing so many challenges in that situation. And when you're asking somebody who's already going through that to add one extra layer of hassle to their situation, it's burdensome to them. I want to be mindful of the time, so I'm going to stop right there and wrap things up if that's okay with you. I will send you a list of all of the questions that have come in this evening. If anybody has a question that wasn't addressed, you're welcome to email us and I can forward those on for a response. And then I will also be sending out an email here in the next few minutes that has a survey. The survey is really brief. It takes less than 3 minutes to fill out. It's anonymous, but we appreciate your feedback. It helps us design our upcoming webinar series that we're planning for the next year. And we also can provide feedback to the speakers as well. With that, we'll wrap things up. We did record this, and I believe Rinki and Ianessa are providing a handout that we'll send out when that's available. So give us another day or two to get that to you, but we'll send you a couple emails here in the next few days. You'll also receive a certificate of participation. If that's applicable to you for continuing education, you're welcome to use that. Again, these aren't ASHA CEUs, but you can use them for continuing education. So I will send out that email momentarily. And with that, Ianessa and Rinki, thank you both so much for volunteering your time and your expertise to present to our community. I think this was a very valuable presentation for everybody that joined us this evening. All right, and we'll sign off now. Thank you. Have a great evening, everybody, and we hope to see you again soon.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.